All right, welcome to the deep dive. Today we're taking on, well, a pretty unique challenge.
Oh, yeah.
We're diving deep into the world of lesson planning for English language teaching. And it's more than just understanding what teachers do.
Right.
We want to find those golden nuggets, those actionable insights that can shed light on how any successful learning experience is structured.
Absolutely. I mean, just glancing at the resources you've gathered, it's amazing how diverse they are. We've got everything from the nitty-gritty of individual lesson plans
Yeah.
to those bigger picture educational philosophies. It's a real opportunity to see the forest and the trees when it comes to building effective learning environments.
It really is. You've given us a full toolkit here. So whether you're a teacher yourself or just someone who's fascinated by how people learn, heck, even if you're just curious about the design behind any kind of structured activity,
Yeah.
I think we're going to find some surprisingly useful insights here. We'll be looking at setting goals, choosing methods, and being flexible when things don't go to plan. Ready to jump in?
Let's do it.
Okay, so one of the sources breaks down a lesson into these core stages. First up, you've got your instructional objectives. Then it's warm-up, presentation, practice, and finally, production evaluation. What really struck me was how much emphasis there is on having super clear instructional objectives.
Yeah, absolutely. This source really emphasizes the need for observable and measurable objectives. They even give a list of action verbs, things like pronounce, write, identify, apply, compare, answer, use, match, distinguish,
Right.
list. The list goes on. It makes you think, if you don't know exactly what you want someone to be able to do by the end of the lesson, how can you possibly know if they've learned anything?
Such a good point. It's like without those clear, measurable goals, you're just shooting in the dark.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Think of them as your learning GPS. They tell you where you want to go and how you'll know when you've arrived.
I love that analogy. Yeah. So then we move into the warm-up. This model suggests just 5 minutes for this stage. It's all about linking the new material to what students already know, revisiting past lessons, checking homework, catching those common mistakes early on.
It's like tuning an instrument before a performance, making sure everything's in harmony.
Perfect analogy. And then comes the presentation, around 15 minutes where the teacher takes center stage. They're introducing new concepts, maybe using different scenarios or even writing out key steps. It's all about laying the groundwork.
Right, and then that shifts nicely into the practice stage. Also about 15 minutes. Now the focus is on the student. They're actively working with the new material, doing exercises, and the teacher becomes more of a guide, helping them apply what they've learned.
So it's moving from theory to practice.
Exactly.
And then that brings us to the final 10 minutes, the production evaluation stage. This is where the teacher checks if those initial objectives have been met. Can the students actually use the language now?
And this is where that feedback loop comes in. The source points out if the students haven't reached those objectives, the teacher needs to be ready to try a different approach, revisit the material. It really highlights how teaching is this constant process of evaluating and adapting.
It's so dynamic.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's one very structured model of a lesson. But, another resource he gave us takes a slightly different approach.
Oh, yeah.
It focuses on these core elements that should be in any teaching sequence, regardless of the exact timing. It's called the Engage, Study, Activate Framework, or ESA.
What's interesting here is while the first model was very linear, ESA highlights these crucial elements that can be arranged in a more flexible way within a lesson.
Right.
And Engage is all about grabbing the student's interest right off the bat, getting them involved. It's the hook that draws them in.
Which, connects perfectly with what our listeners are always telling us.
Yeah.
They love those aha moments and they want to avoid feeling overwhelmed.
Yeah.
So, if you can make that initial connection fun and relevant,
Yeah.
you've already won half the battle.
You're absolutely right. It's that spark that makes them want to learn more.
Exactly. So then we have study, where the focus narrows down to specific language aspects. Grammar rules, new vocabulary, pronunciation. This is also where you might do some revision, reinforcing what they've already learned. It's a more analytical part of the process.
It's time for focused learning.
Yes. And then finally, we've got activate. This is where the students really get to use the language, mostly through speaking and writing.
And the source really emphasizes how important this stage is. It's like a rehearsal in a safe environment, helping them get to the point where they can use the language more automatically.
That automaticity is so key. I always think of it like learning to ride a bike. At first, you're so conscious of every movement,
Right.
but eventually it just becomes second nature.
Exactly. And that's what we want with language.
Okay, so we've looked at two different frameworks for structuring a lesson. Now let's zoom out a bit and think about the bigger picture.
Hmm.
What are those core principles that underpin effective planning? This is something that comes up in a lot of the sources you've shared.
Absolutely. And one that keeps popping up is the importance of setting clear and realistic aims.
Yes. The sources stress that aims shouldn't be so easy that students get bored, but they shouldn't be so difficult that they feel discouraged.
It's finding that sweet spot.
It really is. And to help with that, one source gives this great checklist. You need to think about what the students already know, what they need to know, especially if they're exams or something.
Right.
What's been covered in previous lessons, how well the group works together, and even their overall motivation levels.
It's a great reminder that planning isn't just about the subject matter. You really have to understand your learners.
Absolutely. Another key principle is variety.
Yes. Monotony kills engagement. Mixing things up is like hitting the refresh button for your brain. Different activities, different materials, different ways to interact. Silent work, discussions, individual tasks, group projects. It keeps things fresh and caters to different learning styles.
Makes sense. Think about your own experiences learning something new.
Yeah.
A change of pace can make all the difference.
Absolutely.
And then there's the principle of flexibility, which might seem a little odd when we're talking about having a plan, right?
Right, but it's crucial. One of the sources puts it perfectly. Expect the unexpected.
Yeah.
No matter how well you plan, classrooms are dynamic. You might have time constraints, unexpected questions, or maybe the students get really interested in a particular topic and you want to explore that further.
So the plan is more like a roadmap than a strict itinerary.
Exactly. And good teachers learn to think on their feet. A well-thought-out plan often includes backup activities or alternative approaches. You have to be ready to seize those unexpected learning moments.
That's so true. Now let's get a little deeper into the planning process. One source talks about defining aims with underlying concepts.
Oh, interesting.
So, for example, teaching for and since with the present perfect isn't just about memorizing the grammar rules.
Right.
It's about understanding the concept of expressing the duration of an action or a state.
That makes sense. And it makes me think, if the teacher isn't completely clear on the why behind the grammar, it's easy to see how students could get lost in the rules without really understanding the purpose.
Absolutely. And to bridge that gap between the concept and the application, this source suggests using contexts and marker sentences, creating real-life situations where the target language would naturally be used.
Like what?
Like, they give the example of simulating a party to practice for and since when talking about how long you've known someone. That way, it's more relevant and memorable.
Makes sense.
And these marker sentences act as clear examples of the language in action. The source says these examples can come from all sorts of places: readings, listening exercises, even the students themselves.
And they can be used in different ways too, right?
Yes. The source talks about the difference between inductive and deductive approaches. With inductive, the teacher presents these marker sentences and guides the students to figure out the grammatical patterns themselves.
Oh, I see.
With deductive, the teacher uses the marker sentences to explain the rules directly.
So different ways to get to the same understanding.
Exactly. Okay, so we've talked about the why and the what of lesson planning. Let's dive into the how. How are these principles actually used in real lesson plans? You gave me some fantastic examples covering reading, listening, conversation, and grammar.
Let's take a look.
Perfect. Let's start with this reading lesson on brain drain. The first thing that jumps out is how specific the objectives are. They target all these different reading skills: skimming, identifying main ideas, understanding references, making inferences, even note-taking.
And each objective is clearly defined. It's not just understand the text. It's much more specific than that.
Exactly. And the activities are all directly linked to those objectives. Matching headings to paragraphs, putting jumbled ideas in order, answering questions about specific detail. It's all very focused practice.
And there's a progression, too. It starts with more general comprehension and moves towards deeper analysis and application, like that group discussion to brainstorm solutions for brain drain.
Right. And the gap fill exercise at the end to really solidify their understanding of the vocabulary. We see that same structured approach in the other reading lesson, the one on international organizations.
Yes. Clear vocabulary objectives, then activities to practice scanning for specific information, recalling details, and demonstrating overall comprehension.
And both reading lessons end with a writing task, which is great. It gives the students a chance to really use the language they've learned.
It consolidates their learning. Now, if we shift to the listening lessons, they have a slightly different structure, often with those distinct pre-listening, while listening, and post-listening stages.
Yeah, like this leisure and entertainment lesson. It starts with a warm-up to activate their existing knowledge about leisure activities. Then they make predictions about the topic before they even listen.
And then during the listening phase, there are multiple listenings, each with a different focus. First, they listen for the main idea. Then they listen for specific details, maybe true-false statements or choosing the right picture.
And the post-listening stage is so important. It reinforces what they've heard with comprehension questions, maybe filling out an emotion chart, and often culminating in a short writing activity. The celebration listening lesson follows a similar model, with that focus on prediction and then multiple listenings with progressively more challenging tasks.
It's like they're peeling back the layers of the listening text, each time getting a little deeper into the meaning.
Exactly. Now, moving on to conversation skills. The lesson on asking for and responding to permission is really practical.
Very functional.
Yes. The goal is for students to be able to recognize and use those expressions correctly. The presentation uses a video to show natural examples. Then they analyze those examples and create a chart to categorize the different ways to ask for and give permission.
I love how visual that is.
Me too. And the practice activities give them a chance to try those expressions out through dialogue completion. And then, of course, the production stage takes it further with role-playing.
Using cue cards to create those real-life scenarios.
Yes. The making and responding to complaints lesson follows a similar format. First, they analyze a sample dialogue. Then they practice classifying and using the expressions. And finally, they role-play different complaint scenarios.
So practical.
And finally, let's look at the grammar lessons. These are much more focused on specific grammatical structures, like this lesson on the present continuous.
The objectives are clear. Be able to identify and use the present continuous correctly. The presentation uses visuals and elicitation techniques to introduce the form and the different ways it's used, plus clear explanations of any tricky spelling rules.
And then the practice activities really build that familiarity and accuracy. Matching exercises, picture descriptions, and then the production stage lets them create their own original sentences using the present continuous.
The other grammar lessons, like the ones on to be and adverbs of frequency, follow a similar pattern. First, they learn the form, then they do controlled practice, and finally they produce their own examples.
It's so interesting to see those core principles we talked about earlier applied across all these different types of lessons. Clear objectives, engaging activities, structured practice, opportunities for production.
And that focus on understanding the student's needs is always there, especially in those warm-up and pre-activity stages. And even with all the detailed planning, there's that built-in flexibility, recognizing that the teacher has to be ready to adapt.
It's amazing, isn't it? It's a real art form. So we've gone from dissecting the stages of a lesson to exploring broader frameworks like ESA. We've talked about the importance of aims, variety, and flexibility. We've looked at real-world examples of how these principles are used in practice. We've really taken a deep dive into the world of lesson planning.
We have. And I don't know about you, but I'm really struck by the level of detail and thoughtfulness that goes into crafting even a single language lesson.
It's quite humbling, and it makes you think about the planning and design principles behind all sorts of learning and skill development, even outside of a classroom.
Right, like in our own lives.
Exactly. So here's a question for you and for our listeners to think about. How might consciously applying some of these ideas, setting clear goals for yourself, actively engaging with what you're learning, practicing consistently, and staying flexible, how might that enhance your learning journeys no matter what you're trying to learn? It's something to ponder until our next deep dive.